Hey everyone, and happy holidays. Christmas time is here. Sorry, I had to do it. But basically Christmas is right around the corner, and I just wanted to take this week to kind of make some Christmas related videos and content for you guys, because this is the time of the year that we should be celebrating those around us, and just the holiday season in general. Always try to get those good vibes out there this time of year, and let the ones that you love know that you care about them. Big part of the season, especially for me, is Christmas music. I know it's not up everybody's alley, but for me, this is what I thrive on, okay? Really, this is such a great time for me to kind of go back to old classics that really bring that Yuletide cheer, and really kind of discover new classics, new Christmas classics, or ones that I had not heard about before. And that has to do with listening to a lot of Christmas albums. Now, granted, I haven't listened to a whole lot this year, but I have definitely heard my fair share over the past few, and got quite a few albums to talk to you about today, because today I want to bring you guys my list of the top 10 Christmas albums, according to me, that I've heard. So yeah, let's not waste any more time, and let's get right into these records that I just think are absolutely fantastic. But before we do that, let me just drop a few honorable mentions on the screen. No Andy Williams on the list? Well, just wait and you'll see what I've got in the store for you guys. So yeah, let's get right into number 10. And kicking us off with number 10 is none other than the Christmas classic, A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Spector from 1963. An album so good, in fact, that Brian Wilson says it's his favorite album of all time. And I personally wouldn't go that far, but man, this is hard to argue, is some would say the most iconic Christmas album of all time. I don't know if I'd agree, but it's certainly up there. I mean, come on, bringing in the Ronettes, the Crystals, Darlene Love, and even Bobby Sox and the Blue Jeans, whose tracks I quite frankly don't really care for on this album. But this is such a seminal record, not just in Christmas music, because Phil Spector really wanted to put the Christmas spirit out into the open, which I don't know why, because he wasn't really the type that would give the Christmas cheer, if you get what I'm saying. But regardless, he really loved Christmas music, and he wanted to make this album, so he got all the people on the Phillies label together and made so many Christmas classics on here. I mean, just starting off with Darlene Love's version of White Christmas, just her talking on the track about coming from LA and wishing to be back home, and wishing for a white Christmas. It's really such an upbeat, soulful version of that song, and I think one of the really interesting covers that we've heard, and really has that Phil Spector stamp on it, with Hal Blaine going crazy on the drums, and just that spectoral wall of sound that's been so influential on so many records, including Pet Sounds. And I think that listening to this album on headphones, I don't really think you get to hear the density in the mix, because I think listening to this mono pressing on stereo is really the best way to get this album, because when I was playing this on my speakers, I was absolutely blown away by the production here, and really for one of the first times I've appreciated Phil Spector's production, because I certainly don't appreciate him in many other aspects. But regardless, I mean, so many Christmas classics. The Ronettes version of Frosty the Snowman, which always makes me think of the Christmas scene in Goodfellas at the party. So iconic. Of course, I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, yet again another absolute classic song. I love Darlene's cover of Marshmallow World. And there's some really interesting offbeat patterns that go on that really switch the song up and give it a lot more of a lively feel. As you could say for this whole album, this really is, as I said, a Phil Spector Christmas album. Even though all these artists are on there, it has his stamp of production, and there's no mistaking his trademark. My personal favorite song on here is the Ronettes version of Sleigh Ride, which, oh my goodness, such a classic track as soon as you hear it come in. Absolutely one of my favorite Christmas songs of all time. But we cannot talk about this album without talking about Christmas Baby Please Come Home, the iconic Darlene Love classic, which is really a Phil Spector original and has become a Christmas staple since its release in 1963. So many other tracks on here that are absolutely fantastic, and I'm not even scratching the surface. But why isn't this higher, Nathaniel? Well, let me tell you. I think, as I said, the Bobby Sox and the Blue Jeans songs I'm not huge on. I like the Bells of St. Mary's. Like, it's good, but, you know, it's not as great as these other songs. But, man, I tell you, when you get to Silent Night where Phil Spector's just talking over it, it is one of the creepiest things I've ever heard on a Christmas album. And I think just considering how much of a piece of garbage Phil Spector was, maybe that has something to do with it. But his voice, it's just too high-pitched and eerie, and them just singing underneath it. It's like, oh my goodness, I do not want to hear this man speak. He is garbage human being. Once again, let me reiterate that, and really brings this record down just a little bit because of his presence. But regardless, what he did on this album with these groups, I mean, cannot be disputed. You hear all these songs on Christmas radio all the time, and as I said, used in movies, especially in Martin Scorsese films. So yeah, this is an absolute Christmas classic, and the one that's rounding out my top 10. At number 9, I have That's Christmas to Me by Pentatonix from 2014. You got Scott Hoying, Mitch Grassi, Kirsten Maldonado, Avi Kaplan, and Kevin Olusala. I mean, this group right here bringing us an a cappella Christmas album, entirely a cappella, and my goodness, the textures that they create with their voice is really what makes this group stand out and is why they've had this enduring popularity. And to be quite honest, I don't listen to a lot of their stuff because there aren't too many originals to my knowledge, but this Christmas album, my goodness, one of the best Christmas albums I've ever heard. Right off the bat with their version of Hark the Herald Angels Sing, really set themselves to be substantive from everything else that you've heard in the Christmas realm. I mean, this is really the arrangement on this album that they come up with for their voices is absolutely incredible and really different from a lot of songs in the similar vein, or at least, you know, in the way that this song is covered. Absolutely incredible. Of course, their version of Sleigh Ride absolutely slaps. I mean, every version of Sleigh Ride basically slaps, but this is no exception. And of course, I absolutely love the mashup of Winter Wonderland and Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry Be Happy, featuring Tori Kelly of all people. Really such a beautiful mix of vocal reggae and an absolute Christmas classic. I never would have thought to done it, but these guys came up with it, built this arrangement, and really just tore the roof off the place. I think that song is absolutely brilliant, but to me, the one that really stands out above all the rest is their cover of Mary Did You Know. My goodness, once you get to the latter legs of the song, it's just all of these people coming together and all their 5 voices just singing in harmony. It is one of the most mind-blowingly powerful moments on any Christmas album. Just the prowess there is unbelievable once again. And of course, even their version of Dance with the Sugar Plum Fairies, I mean, really such a great on Tchaikovsky, because really, I mean, there aren't any lyrics, but that melody is so iconic, and what they bring to it is absolutely incredible. And of course, even their version of It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year obviously doesn't have anything on the Andy Williams classic, but still such a beautiful arrangement nonetheless. Also really love their version of Santa Claus Is Coming to Town, another great classic on this album. I think the originals I don't think are necessarily my favorite, or at least Winter Hymnal is an original, but something they did, and that's Christmas to Me. Like, it's nice. Just not my favorite song on the album, and I think Silent Night kind of falls a little flat, not vocally or, you know, pitch-wise, but I think that by the end it's kind of like, okay, like, we're good now. And I don't really know why they needed to let it go on there. I know Frozen was, like, popular that year or whatever, but I don't really think it needed to be on the album. But yeah, this is really one fantastic Christmas record. Can't get enough of it, and it comes in at a crisp 32 minutes, so it's like you turn it on and then time flies by with these guys here. I mean, really, maybe the best a cappella group of all time. Kind of hard to argue that, considering how complex these arrangements are in this album. Really, there was a lot of work that went into this Christmas album, and I hope to listen to more of their Christmas albums in the near future. And at number 8, I have the self-proclaimed Queen of Christmas herself, Mariah Carey with Merry Christmas. Of course, you gotta have this album on here. Mariah Carey, pop sensation. Really, this Christmas album, I think, some people discredit, but I think has so much musical substance here, because not only is Mariah Carey popping off with her whistle tone and what have you, but the gospel choir on this thing really kicks this to another level, especially opening up with her version of Silent Night, which is absolutely phenomenal. And of course, because she reaches that whistle register. And this was really my introduction to Mariah Carey, so I think that this album really blew me away when I heard what she was capable of vocally. Because I heard, I knew Mariah Carey, but I'd never been very familiar with her work. And of course, her version of Oh Holy Night blows the roof off the entire building, man. When she gets up there, once again, it's absolutely mind-blowing, but the choir is so powerful, so surging, really makes you feel the emotion put into these Christmas classics. But of course, you come here for the big iconic hit, All I Want for Christmas Is You. Absolutely a Christmas classic, a modern Christmas classic. We don't get many of these, but Mariah Carey co-wrote this and really made this a mega hit that is still played to death on Christmas radio, and I think with good reason, because it is such a banger. Everybody knows it. And of course, you got to talk about the other cuts on here too that are really great, like her version of Santa Claus Is Coming to Town. Gotta love that song. Of course, her cover of the Darlene Love classic, Christmas Baby Please Come Home. Obviously, it's not better than that version, but you still have to mention it amongst the other tracks on this album. And my goodness, her mashup of Joy to the World, the traditional one that we know in the Three Dog Night version. Oh my goodness, never would have thought to do that, but it works so well, and just the 90s dance beat underneath it. I know some people think it's dated, but I think it really drives the song forward at another level. I really absolutely love this album. And of course, made the top 90 albums of the 90s, deservedly so. I think that this is a Christmas classic, and really, you gotta spin Mariah Carey when it comes to the Christmas season. Absolutely essential, but please do not buy the vinyl version of this album, because to be quite frank, the pressing quality, it sucks. So, regardless though, whatever place you can find this in, whether it be on streaming, or if you can find a good pressing of the vinyl, let me know, because trust me, I'm going to want to get it. So yeah, absolute classic, and had to be on the list. And at number 7, we have none other than Elvis's Christmas album by none other than Elvis Presley from 1957. Obviously, if you remember, made my top 10 albums of the 50s, and with good reason. The first side of this album is absolutely killer. Starting off this whole thing with Santa Claus is Back in Town, Lieber and Stoller classic. I mean, what an incredible song, and Elvis's delivery, so memorable. I really think the whole first half of this thing, all the rock and roll oriented tracks, like his version of Here Comes Santa Claus. Here comes Santa Claus, here comes Santa Claus. I mean, just Elvis's delivery was like no other performer that came before or after him. And I think it really suits these Christmas songs quite well. Of course, his version of White Christmas, just kind of more greased up, if you will. Absolutely incredible. So controversial, in fact, that I think Irving Berlin actually wanted it pulled from the airways. But that shows you how the conservative generation once again passes over music and sees it as disgusting. Very, very interesting, because it's very tame by today's comparison, so don't really know what's going on there. Well, I do, but hey, whatever. That was the times. So yeah, absolutely incredible cover. I also love his version, very, very heartfelt version of I'll Be Home for Christmas. One of his best vocal performances on this album, but of course, Santa Bring My Baby Back to Me. Gotta love that song. An absolute Elvis classic in general. But of course, his version of Blue Christmas is really what you remember the most from this. An absolute, not just Elvis classic, like I was saying with the other song, but I think one of the all-time Christmas classic for sure. And certainly the best Christmas track he ever laid down to tape. The second side is more, spiritual, and half the songs aren't even about Christmas. Only little "O Little Town of Bethlehem" and "Silent Night" are, which I think are the two best songs on that side. And then it just drops off, and songs like "There Will Be Peace in the Valley," like. It's not that they're bad at all or anything like that, but they aren't very Christmassy. But I tell you, it's really this first side of the record that puts this over. I can't imagine if Elvis had done a whole album just following that template, what we could have had. But really, I mean, this is a great record nonetheless. One of the best from the 50s. One of Elvis's absolute, I'd say, probably top 3 albums after his debut, and from Elvis in Memphis. Just an absolute Christmas classic. Gotta spin this when the time comes around. And at number 6, we have "Merry Christmas" by none other than Andy Williams from 1965. The second album titled "Merry Christmas" on this list, and certainly not the last. And this is exactly what I was talking about. Just wait for it and you will see him. Probably the second king of Christmas after Bing Crosby, so maybe the Prince of Christmas we can call him, I don't know. But this album, compared to his first one, which the Andy Williams Christmas album has his most iconic Christmas classics, like "It's the Most Wonderful Time in the Year," "Happy Holidays," I think it kind of has the Elvis Christmas album syndrome. And that's the thing, I mean, Andy Williams wasn't Elvis, so, I mean, he really couldn't do a whole much about that. But this album, I think, is even more consistent, even without those classics. I mean, opening this thing up with his version of "Sleigh Ride," you hear the ding-a-ling, ding-ding-a-ling, and just hear those bells shaking, and just hear those sleigh bells jingling, ring ting-tingling too. You hear that crooning baritone voice, you know exactly what you're in for. You know Andy Williams is here to serenade you some Christmas tunes. Yes, sir. But yeah, I mean, this whole track list is incredible. The second track on here, the harpsichord-laden version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," I really wasn't expecting the musical sort of innovation here on a Christmas song, but really it just plays off so well, mixing those flourishes of harpsichord with this very, very full, lush orchestral sound. Absolutely love that. One of my favorite versions of any Andy Williams Christmas song. Yet again, the whole first side of this album is amazing, with his version of my favorite things of all songs, but really done so well. Absolutely love that version. "Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow." Another great version of an Andy Williams Christmas song. I mean, really, this guy poured everything into this album. I think, as opposed to his last one, this is by far his most consistent. I think his version of "Winter Wonderland" is honestly iconic in its own right. Maybe not as iconic as, let's say, I don't know, the Johnny Mathis version, but really, oh my goodness, I just love it. And then where you hear at the end, "Sleigh bells ring," when he holds on that suspended note there, or that E, man. I mean, it's just awesome. And of course, gotta love his version of "Christmas Holiday," which is really kind of like them trying to recapture the success of "Happy Holidays" and not really hitting the mark all the way. But still, I think it's a great tune. Yet again, the production's great. The orchestration is absolutely incredible. And as opposed to the last album we just talked about, I don't think the second half falls off that much. Granted, I will say, I think his version of "Little Altar Boy" is kind of boring. But I'll tell you, his version, "Do You Hear What I Hear," yet again, probably one of the most iconic Andy Williams songs you hear on Christmas radio. That's the thing, I didn't realize going into this album how many of these versions I had already heard. And I was just blown away how much more consistent it is. "Mary's Little Boy Child," I mean, oh my goodness, his warm vocal tones on this song really wrap you into this story about Jesus' birth in the lowly manger. Really absolutely incredible. And of course, my favorite song on this album is his version of "Silver Bells." So substantive. I really love any version of "Silver Bells," but I think Andy Williams really hits the mark with this one. His croonful, soulful voice. Absolutely a classic Christmas album that I think is criminally overlooked. really one of the best of its era. I mean, 1965, this came out the same year as Rubber Soul and Highway 61 Revisited. Not that it has anything to do with them, but I think it just shows you how much great music was coming out of this time and how some of the albums might have gotten lost in the mix. But this is certainly one, if you haven't checked it out and you've only heard the Andy Williams Christmas album, do yourself a favor and listen to this album that I think is even better. Absolutely have to have Andy Williams on the list. And kicking off the top 5 on this list, we have Ella Wishes You a Swingin' Christmas by none other than Ella Fitzgerald from 1960. This really is, top to bottom, one of the most solid Christmas albums of all time, and really is Christmas vocal jazz, if you will, at its finest, with Ella Fitzgerald, who had one of the most purest tones in all the music, and in the way she would accentuate certain phrases and draw the emotion out of them was so amazing, and obviously all over this album, so very, very much prevalent and apparent on this. Of course, so many great classics. Her version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town on here. Her version of The Christmas Song and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas are absolutely beautiful. I think, though, one of the absolute standouts on here is her version of What Are You Doing New Year's Eve, which I think shows the perfect example of what I was just talking about, with the way she used her voice as a tool to really emote the songs and really draw something out of them that maybe another singer couldn't ever achieve in that sense. And just so impressive with her vocals. And of course, my favorite song, once again, another one of these, I know, her version of Sleigh Ride, which makes me think of that scene in Elf when he's out, when he's like sleeping in the window and he's like, Dad! Dad! Yeah, just so incredible. But yeah, I mean, just the swinging version, and that it perfectly exemplifies another reason she was so great, is her use of scat singing. The notes that she ends up on, it really is super improvisational, as you can hear by some of the notes that she hits on this thing and how they fall within the chord structure of the song. I think it is one of the best versions of that song, which is saying quite a lot considering all I've gone on about it in the series so far. And I also love, and there's even a blues song on here, which is, very welcome. Not my favorite, but, it's definitely worth noting. I think this album, as I said, from top to bottom, super consistent. I just think it has its handful of corny moments, like on the opening track in Jingle Bells, she's like, I'm so crazy about horses. It's like, who cares? And also, I think the backing vocals kind of take away from Ella's performance. I think are kind of mawkish for today's standards. It doesn't really, it sounds a bit dated, if you will. And of course, Frosty the Snowman, I think is, it's a little cringe when they're going, Charleston. It's like, oh my goodness, do I really want to hear that? No, it just sounds so, it sounds like something your grandma might even be embarrassed by, or great-grandma in this case, I don't know, but regardless, this is an absolute Christmas classic. The instrumentation on here is so lush, as you'd expect from any jazz record from that period. Let's say anything on a Coltrane record, or let's say a Davis record. I mean, obviously it's nothing like that, but I just mean the playing is so substantial and so warm, and I think the production on this thing, besides some of the backing vocals, really holds up to this day. And I really think that this is an iconic Christmas classic that anybody who's heard it can agree on is one of the best of the season. And at number 4 on the list is Merry Christmas once again, this time by Bing Crosby, the best album titled Merry Christmas in my opinion. And if you remember, one that also made my top 10 albums of the 50s, coming from 1955. This is a compilation of a lot of things that Christmas recordings that Bing had done throughout the 40s and the 50s thrown onto here, which tells you maybe the production isn't that great. I mean, especially early on in the record of Silent Night, it's a little shaky production-wise, though I do love his version of Adeste Fideles. Absolutely wonderful. I mean, really, Bing Crosby, let's face it, the king of Christmas music, as I alluded to earlier. Rolling Stone made a slightly blasphemous claim one time that he is to Christmas music what Jesus is to Christmas. As I said, a little blasphemous, but I certainly understand what they're trying to say, and I don't disagree with that. Absolutely incredible what Bing does on here. Just that warm voice of his. I mean, you know it's Christmas when you hear White Christmas come on the radio, which, I mean, let's be honest, is the greatest Christmas recording of all time. Nothing signifies it more than Bing's crooning bass voice. I mean, just absolutely amazing. So many other great tracks on here. God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. Of course, his version of Jingle Bells. I hear those Jingle bells. Those holiday Jingle bells. I mean, you gotta love it. You know it. You've heard it so many times. Absolute Bing Crosby Christmas classic. Same thing with Christmas in Killarney, which I think is an absolute banger. I don't know if anybody else has covered that song in contemporary Christmas music, but Bing certainly makes it such a wonderful Irish tune. Absolutely love that track. Of course, his version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. And I absolutely love his deeply arranged and, at least vocally speaking, version of Silver Bells with Carol Richards. Just the way they sing in tandem with each other, trading off these vocal lines. When one's singing Silver Bells and you hear Bing going, the corner candy store. You know, just these polyphonic textures weaving together to create really maybe the standout version of that song. And of course, his version of It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas. Always something that I hear probably before everything else when it comes to the Christmas season, whenever it starts up. And of course, Mele Kalikimaka. Oh my goodness, how can you not love that track? Puts you right on the beach and also reminds you of the pool scene from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. But besides the point, I really think this goes to show you how iconic these Christmas recordings are. Gotta have the King of Christmas himself on here, or at least the King of Christmas music, I should say. Absolute classic, and absolutely should be in anybody's top 5 Christmas albums, I think. Now, getting into the top 3, we have none other than the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack, original motion picture soundtrack by Danny Elfman from 1993. Yet again, another album that made the top 90 albums of the 90s series with me and Johnny Radio. And despite what he may have said about it, this is one of the best Christmas albums of all time. And I think, in my opinion, Danny Elfman's most consistent and best score. Because not only are you merging 2 holidays here, especially with the ever so iconic This Is Halloween, which you always hear at Halloween, not at Christmas. But hey, it still makes the list. And, you know, could be obnoxious to some. I get that, with the very exaggerated character voices. But I think what Danny Elfman does here musically is just so incredible. All the instruments he's bringing in, whether it be organs, and I'm not talking about in this specific song, but just in general on the whole album, the organs, all these very, very eclectic instruments, the bells that just play throughout this entire thing, especially on What's This? What's This? There's music everywhere. I mean, you gotta love that song just when Jack enters Christmastown. Absolutely amazing, that track. Jack's Lament is another absolute highlight. But I really love so many songs on here. Making Christmas is musically so explorative, but absolutely lyrically hysterical in the most darkest ways possible, which really, you know, obviously adds a charm to the film. All the demented details in these songs, and absolutely something that could only come from the mind of Danny Elfman. But as I said, there's just so much variety on here. And as I said in the 90s series, Oogie Boogie Song, not my favorite, but it's a New Orleans jazz number. And really, I mean, that just shows you how he's pulling from all these different musical styles and kind of throwing him onto this grand musical palette that was this film, commissioned by Tim Burton and directed by Henry Selick. I mean, absolute classic from top to bottom, and I really love some of the instrumental tracks on here too. Like To the Rescue, which really is a mix of a New Orleans jazz tune that suddenly shifts into like this gothic horror piece, and I just think it just shows you how talented Danny Elfman is a composer and as a singer on this thing, because obviously originally he just recorded these demos. They were going to find someone else, but they're like, no, Elfman's voice fits this perfectly. We can't have anybody else doing it, to the point that Chris Sarandon voiced the character of Jack Skellington, but Danny Elfman was a singing voice, and I think time has gone to show that that was the right decision. Not a fan of some of the extended tracks on here or the intros, because Patrick Stewart, I love the guy, has nothing to do with this movie, but they bring him in on the soundtrack and then goes out on the end talking about how Jack and Sally had Skellington babies. Like, what the hell? That's just so weird. But regardless, you know, I think that this is an absolute Christmas classic. It's an absolute Halloween classic. It's just an absolute classic soundtrack to one of the most classic animated films in cinema canon. Really, it doesn't really get much better than Nightmare Before Christmas, this cross-seasonal holiday film that can be enjoyed by so many. And really, I mean, this soundtrack proves that it isn't just the film itself that makes it so iconic. And coming in at number 2 on my list is Christmas Portrait by none other than the Carpenters from 1978. I mean, this album, look, you could say it's a little bit hokey, a little bit Lawrence Welkish in regards to some of the production on here, but my goodness, the music itself, the thought, the effort, the performances on here are just so incredible. Just with that overture that kicks this thing off, I swear, this is like the Christmas equivalent to the overture of Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, really, I'm not even kidding. Like, I heard this on a stereo system the first time listening to this, and I was absolutely blown away. The technicality that went into the grandioseness, the technicality that went into this overture, but just on all these songs, man. Of course, I love their version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I mean, I just love their version of Sleigh Ride Through. That seems to be a common trend in this video. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, the Christmas song, and of course, I mean, how can you go wrong with the swooning contralto vocals of Karen Carpenter? Oh my goodness, literally the voice of an angel. I haven't talked about the Carpenters too much on this channel, but I'm so glad to be talking about this album, because I think absolutely Karen Carpenter is another one where you hear her voice on these Christmas songs, and you know that you're getting those warm, fuzzy feelings that the season is upon us. I mean, absolutely incredible, her vocals throughout this entire thing. And we can't forget about Richard on here either, because obviously not the most vocally talented of the duo, but my goodness, listen to their instrumental version of Carol of the Bells on here, and you can just tell how much of a virtuoso piano player that Richard Carpenter is. And it's just incredible. It's so brief, but I mean, it leaves such an impact just listening to him bang away on those keys. And oh my goodness, their version of Merry Christmas Darling is really, I think, the all-time great Carpenter's Christmas song. Just heard it so many times throughout the holidays, and I think one of Karen's absolute warmest and most sincere vocal performances on any Carpenter's record. So many other stunning moments on this record too, like their version of I'll Be Home for Christmas, the medley of Winter Wonderland, Silver Bells, and White Christmas, and of course Karen Carpenter's stunning performance of Ave Maria at the end of this thing. I mean, really, this is yet again another underrated, overlooked Christmas classic. I mean, because everybody hears the Carpenters at Christmas time, and even if you think this is a bit twee, I still feel like the music is so strong on here that maybe some of this dated 70s corniness is forgotten and lost in the mix, because really it isn't that big of an issue. You only hear it a few times here or there. I think, yet again, this duo, one of the best of all time, and you can't have Christmas without the warm tones of Karen Carpenter's voice. I just think it's impossible. And at this point, I mean, if you guys know me, you should know already what my number 1 Christmas album is going to be. It's one of my top 20 favorite albums of all time. Also made my top 10 albums of the 1960s. Of course, that is A Charlie Brown Christmas by the Vince Guaraldi Trio. I mean, nothing screams Christmas more to me than this soulful, cool jazz soundtrack to the greatest holiday special of all time. Guaraldi and gang here really went so hard for something that was thought to have been a failure at first. You know, something that the studio executives didn't really put much money in, as you can tell by the limited animation. But what Guaraldi created here was something so substantial, so musically complex in so many ways. I mean, the improvisation on here, it's so explorative, but the way he comes back around on these themes after going off into these really crazy directions in these songs. I mean, it's not Kind of Blue crazy, right? But, I mean, this might be, besides Kind of Blue, the most iconic jazz album of all time, because at least maybe not in jazz circles, obviously, but I think if we're talking about the general public, I mean, it is the second best-selling jazz album of all time behind of Kind of Blue, so I think that does say something. But really, I mean, so many great tracks on here. The ever so iconic version of O Tannenbaum, which, you know, when Charlie and Linus are going off to get the trees and the very commercial Christmas lot there. Of course, you know, this version of What Child Is This is so smooth and so jazzy, of course. Of course, My Little Drum, such a cool take on the drummer boy, and honestly, better. Of course, the ever so iconic Linus and Lucy, which has basically become the Peanuts theme at this point in time. But to me, I think the greatest Christmas recording after Bing Crosby's White Christmas is the instrumental version of Christmas Time Was Here. Oh my goodness, some of the moments on here just absolutely defy all description, and just so filled with ecstasy. I can't even describe the way Guaraldi goes for certain tone clusters in the song that just come together and clash so beautifully. And of course, the small inversion that he does on one of the chords on the choruses just makes it that much more effective. I absolutely love this track, and of course, the vocal version is great as well. The version of Hark the Herald Angels Sing, which you gotta love. What a beautiful ending to the short with that. Of course, I mean, so many other great tracks. This version of the Christmas song that closes this thing out is quite beautiful. And of course, Christmas Is Coming, which is probably the rowdiest and probably the most purposeful, explorative jazz tune on this entire thing. The way that him and the trio can go off in all these different directions and bring it back to its core, I think really comes to full effect in that song. And I think one of the standouts besides Christmas Time Is Here. I mean, come on, this is really one of the most iconic albums of its era. I mean, especially when it comes to jazz, and the most iconic Christmas album of all time in my estimation, and I think many people would agree with me. So yeah, guys, that's it for my top 10 favorite Christmas albums. I hope you did enjoy the list, and I gave you pretty good explanations on all of these. But you guys tell me, what are your favorite Christmas albums? Do you agree with my picks? Would you have thrown some on? Would you have thrown some off? Let me know in the comments below. Going to be a little bit more Christmas content coming your way. I think I have one more review coming soon, so be on the lookout for that. And of course, so many reviews coming out. I mean, gotta talk about The Whale, of course. Oh my goodness. Babylon, which I am so excited to see. Going to see it very soon here, and going to get my thoughts out to you guys. So until then, you guys have a very Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the next video.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas.